Hello everyone, my name is Pixlriffs and welcome back to another Experimental Snapshot video, and possibly the last. This is Experimental Snapshot 7 for Minecraft 1.18, the Caves and Cliffs Update Part 2, and for once I'm not starting off in survival. We might do a little bit of survival gameplay a little bit later, but most of the changes that have been made in Experimental Snapshot 7 are things that take a little bit longer to achieve, and so I've decided to hop into a creative world first to take a quick look at some of those. So the first thing we're going to do, avoiding the fact that the savannah is now on fire, is find ourselves the largest mountain we possibly can. These foothills around here are probably not going to be worth it. Let me go locate a biome that is going to show us what we want to see here. And here we go, from one biome on fire to presumably another in a second, but this is what I wanted to find. This is a lofty peaks biome, and as you can see from the Y coordinate over there on the left hand side, the height of this biome exceeds Y130. Why this is significant is that above Y130 we can now find noodle caves generating in areas of mountain, and so stuff like this is going to be popping up in mountains a whole lot more. This one actually leads down into the depths of the mountain itself, looks like down into a dripstone cave, and this is a change that's been made so that you can sometimes find these little cave openings in mountain peaks, which not only encourages you to go caving for resources up here, because remember, above a certain height you are guaranteed to find a little bit more coal and iron and emerald ore and all of that kind of stuff. It also creates some more exciting terrain in general around here in these mountains, although this one seems to have generated around the side of a mountain and not carved away the snow. And so I'm not certain if that's intentional or if that's something that they still need to correct, but it looks like some of the layers of snow here, that's regular snow, not powdered snow, does seem to still generate on the surface. But that's kind of cool in a way. It's like the entrance to this cave has frozen over. The changelog also notes that some parts of terrain will be slightly smoother. There is a little bit less 3D noise applied to them. And while meadow biomes like this are large and rolling, and you can expect to see quite a bit of height variation around here, this means that lowlands further down towards the coast aren't going to have such jagged terrain, and it's certainly noticeable in areas like this. I think it'd be great to do a side-by-side comparison of this, but it'd take a long time searching for a biome that had a lot of 3D noise. But I think a lot of people have noticed that these plains biomes and places that we expect to be a little bit more rolling and flat have ended up with a little bit more jagged terrain that players would have to terraform if they wanted the area to look a little flatter. And so it is here that we find one of the last changes in the Experimental Snapshot series that some of that 3D noise has just been tamped down a little bit, so it's a little bit less exaggerated. This cave up here looks absolutely incredible, though. I did spot that in the background and just wanted to see, yeah, there's an aquifer just kind of poking out of the center of this cave, and then further down into the dripstone cave environment, you get another one of those aquifers further down, and just like mountain springs and streams and stuff are possible through this, it makes it really exciting to explore cave environments. So all of those changes that have been made in the previous experimental snapshots are doing really, really great things to the environment now. And even in plains biomes, you'll still find some pretty extraordinary caves, along with the ones that just breach the surface. Occasionally, you will find areas like this that go down into the underground and just keep on going. I love stuff like this, and I think it's really important that these stay in the game, easy though it is to get down to deep slate levels with some of these. And there we go, we can spot our first diamonds down there pretty much instantly. I think it's really cool to have the option to traverse down to the underground in some of these caves instead of having to staircase down somewhere. I think it's nice that we have the option of just walking down into the underground, and hopefully in the upcoming snapshots, once the regular snapshot series starts back up again, we're going to see areas like the Deep Dark becoming part of that, and that's going to be a very exciting prospect. But for now, let's move on to the last change for this changelog, and the reason I'm in creative mode at all, actually, that is that Elytra have changed a little bit, or the way we boost Elytra with rockets has changed a little bit. Let's get some rockets out here just so I can see what I'm doing, and will these actually help me fly? I don't know if they will or not. Okay, it turns out they will, that's good. I wasn't certain if they didn't have a flight duration on them. Oh, and something I should point out, it's not really related to the snapshot, but it's just a thing. I migrated my Mojang account over to a Microsoft account the other day, and I found it really easy to do. So keep in mind that if you're concerned about that change, it's really not all that difficult, and hopefully it should mean your account remains more secure. Basically, the first thing I did was enable two-factor authentication, and I feel a lot happier about the security of this account that I basically use for work. So I'm kind of happy about that change, to be honest. But I'm going to briefly go into survival mode here so that I can do a little bit of flying around, and it feels like, yeah, as somebody who has used Elytra a whole lot since they were implemented, and obviously has boosted Elytra with rockets since rocket boosting was introduced, the Elytra actually feels a little bit different now. It feels slower, and that is the purpose of this change. They have made Elytra rocket boosting a little bit weaker. So the reasons given for this on the changelog is that Elytra rocket boosting is basically so fast that it rules out other forms of transport for how people would like to get around. Things like horses or minecarts. If you want to take the time to set up a minecart rail, you may as well just fly somewhere. The team has also noticed that people flying around generating new areas of the landscape are likely to encounter a lot of chunk loading lag, and that's going to become even worse when there is more terrain to load, both above and below the surface. So what they've done is make the rocket boosting behavior of Elytra a little bit slower, but you'll notice they haven't actually made Elytra themselves slower, it's just the speed rockets give you. Because if I gain a little bit of height here and then I start to glide downwards, you'll notice the Elytra still starts to pick up a little bit more speed. That rushing noise starts to take effect in the sound effects, and frankly, I don't really see myself flying any slower than I normally would. And this means players actually stand to benefit from another change they have made with Elytra. You'll notice the durability has gone down a little bit here, but that is only affected when I'm using rockets, and the use of a rocket is now currently changing my Elytra durability by about 3 points each time. But as I glide around, it no longer loses the standard 1 durability point per second that an Elytra without unbreaking would lose. And so I think the biggest change here is that Elytra doesn't take durability damage when you are gliding. So you don't have to have mending or unbreaking on an Elytra in order to use it indefinitely, as long as you avoid using rockets. And that's really significant because it makes long distance travel in Minecraft a lot safer. You don't have to worry about your Elytra breaking mid-flight as long as you are gliding, and mathematically speaking, if you take a certain amount of rockets with you and only use those rockets, you are guaranteed not to break your Elytra on that trip. Of course, unbreaking and mending are still going to be helpful, but basically you're going to be able to avoid unnecessary accidents while flying around on your Elytra, which is good because I've taken my share of full damage deaths in Minecraft just flying over terrain where I had no idea where that was, and it's not fun, let me tell you. But I want to be a little bit more thorough than just pulling some random firework rockets out of the creative inventory here, because of course firework rockets have different tiers to them. So let me get some gunpowder, there we go, let's grab some of that, let's grab some paper as well, and let's make the different tiers of firework rockets to see if any changes have been made there. So I'll make some flight duration 1 rockets, some flight duration 2 rockets, and some flight duration 3 rockets. Let's get a stack of those. And let's go back into survival mode and see what changes those have made both to our flight time and our durability. So we'll take off from a standing start with flight duration 1, and as you can see, the boost effect is still a little bit slower than we are used to, and that's totally fine. I think that makes a lot of sense, and once again, gliding downwards, the speed is not affected by this change. I'm going to give myself a fresh, undamaged Elytra each time, actually, because I want to measure the durability impact that each of these rockets has on the Elytra. So once again, our fresh Elytra here is taking 3 durability damage each time we use a flight duration 1 rocket. Let's come into land, let's throw that one on the ground, let's equip another one, and let's see what happens when we're using rockets with flight duration 2. So flight duration 2 is actually getting us a little bit more height, naturally. So the boost effect lasts a little bit longer. The rockets themselves are not going to be faster, but it'll get you a little higher up in the air. I assume the same is going to be the case for flight duration 3, but honestly, I think it is more worth crafting those rockets now, because if you can get a bit more height, you will end up gliding further, and that's how you can really gain the distance with Elytra. Obviously, if you still want to spam the rockets around, then you can, but you're not going to be flying at hypersonic speeds. And let's take a quick look at our durability here. We're at 417 now. Let's use a duration 2 rocket, and we're at 414. Okay, so each of these rockets still takes 3 durability off the Elytra each time, and it's nothing to do with the amount of boost time, it's nothing to do with how far you've traveled, it's just a flat rate of 3 durability per rocket, give or take on braking, of course. And so I'm interested to see if Mojang ends up changing that, because in theory now, there isn't much of a reason to craft flight duration 1 rockets, except maybe that you don't have a whole lot of gunpowder. And a lot of players who are interested in flying around long term with Elytra will know how to create things like ghast farms and creeper farms that are going to supply them with a whole lot of gunpowder. So potentially maybe a little bit more of that effort-reward balance plays in here, but I don't really see people using a great deal of flight duration 1 rockets if they have the opportunity, because getting more height with these flight duration 2 or 3 rockets is going to be beneficial to using Elytra long term. So I think we know the answer already, but I'm going to do another quick test with flight duration 3 this time and see if that has any effect on our Elytra's durability. Yeah, the boost really does last a long time. I'm reaching the height of those mountains over there with a single rocket, and once again, it's only taken 3 durability off my Elytra. But frankly, I didn't bother using duration 3 rockets all that much in the past, and now I'm considering using them a lot more, simply because they're just going to get me up into the air a little bit higher, and then I'll just be able to glide to my destination. And in theory, if you get up super high in the air, I'm going to have to turn my coordinates on here for a second. We're not even at the height of the world yet, though, because there we go. The world height has been expanded recently. It's going to feel a little bit slow at first, but then once you start gliding, your gliding speed is going to be about as fast as boosting with rockets was before, if not even a little bit faster. You actually slow yourself down boosting with rockets, so in theory, you have like landing thrusters at this point, which is kind of exciting. And I'm in survival, so I guess I can test this. If I'm reaching speeds where I would be sure to do a bit of kinetic damage to myself, I can actually slow myself down a little bit, and maybe only take about half my health as I slam my face into this cliff. What about flying using Riptide? Is Riptide going to change the durability on the Elytra, or is it going to be a better means of flying than even rockets at this point? Let's see what we get. Oh, I should probably engage my Elytra before I do that. There we go, one quick Riptide later, and it looks like it hasn't affected the Elytra at all. I've set the weather to rain so that we can just fly around in the rain a little bit. Let's use the Riptide effect a couple more times and see if that has had any effect. It has not. Okay, so once again, that might be something they plan to change, but it might also be that Riptide is just going to be the fastest way to get around, provided that it's raining in your world. And of course, provided that you're in a biome where it rains, because of course, over a savanna or a desert or something like that, you're not going to be able to use the Riptide effect until you pass over a river. You might be able to quickly spam Riptide while you're over the river, and then once you get back into the rain, you are good, but it's still a form of flying that the team could already see as well balanced. I think that's all we needed to cover from this changelog. It's been a very small one, which means Mojang is happy enough with the changes we've seen to terrain already to start incorporating all of this stuff back into the regular development cycle of snapshots. And that really means two things. For one, it potentially means that environments like the Deep Dark can now be considered for adding in future snapshots. King B-Dogs has mentioned on Twitter that the Warden and the Deep Dark are progressing well. They're not quite ready for player testing yet, but if the world is ready to receive the Deep Dark somewhere further down in the world, then I honestly think it's going to be nice and easy for them to start including that in player-tested snapshots. The other thing this means, of course, is that players will be able to keep a persistent world through all of the different snapshots. These experimental snapshots were designed so that they weren't compatible with each other because of course, the main thing that they were doing was changing large areas of the terrain, which wouldn't necessarily be as easy to spot if you were logging into a world where you'd already generated some chunks. But the idea behind a regular snapshot is that you can bring a world forward through the snapshots and see each of the changes as they are made to the same world. And so potentially for folks who like to keep one snapshot world that they update and update and update through the snapshot development process, you can keep hold of a long-term world, and I might end up doing this on streams or future videos and test everything out in the same persistent world. We might also start to see some signs of Mojang testing how these new terrain features are going to blend into older worlds, because they have clarified that they don't want this to be an update where people have to reset a world to explore anything new. Yes, you're going to have to go out and generate new chunks in your world, but they have said that they want the upgrade to be as smooth as possible in that regard, and that potentially means a way to blend existing features into newer features without any kind of ugly chunk borders dominating the terrain. And this is something I've got a lot of questions about on these videos, and frankly, I don't know all of the answers just yet, but I'm hoping that it's going to be a smoother transition than anybody in the player base currently thinks. And so I'm really looking forward to that now, because according to the changelog, it seems like they expect Experimental Snapshot 7 will be the last experimental snapshot before they start reintegrating these into the snapshot development cycle that we are used to, and so it's probably time to say a quick farewell to Experimental Snapshot 7 and the Experimental Snapshot series in general, and I'm going to do that in survival. We're going to do one last caving run and exploration run through the overworld in survival, and let's talk a little bit about what we've seen happen in these experimental snapshots. So here we are in a fresh new survival world. I'll put the seed here on the screen and in the video description. I'll also do that for the previous world we were in. We're going to run around in survival here, play a little bit of survival, and hopefully we're going to run into a few of the changes that we've seen happen just in the Experimental Snapshot series alone. Of course, some of those changes are going to be noticeable immediately, like how suddenly we have spawned next to one of the new mountain biomes, but not only that, the terrain slopes up to meet it, and I think this is a really important factor of what's happened in these early experimental snapshots is that the terrain has been decoupled from the biome type so that we no longer have to worry about the landscape feeling the same in every biome. In fact, every corner of the world now, every time you turn around a corner, you find yourself looking at something you've never seen in Minecraft before. And so I think this is a really exciting time in Minecraft's development because the team is really branching out and looking at how they can change the world of Minecraft permanently and for the better. We've seen a few changes to caves being integrated into the terrain as well. I mean, we've seen those as recently as this very snapshot because, of course, we saw the changes to noodle caves a little bit earlier. We've also seen some changes to the availability of iron, which is a much needed change, although I'm still only going to get one piece of raw iron from this vein here. But while the ore distribution itself has not changed a whole bunch, it is nice to see that a little bit more iron is going to be available on the surface for people who don't want to jump straight down into a cave without any armor. We've also seen rivers widening as a result of some of these changes, and I honestly think this is one of my favorite changes so far because rivers in Minecraft tended to be a little bit too uniform. This diversifies rivers to such a degree that they actually feel a little bit more like real-world rivers, but they also have a lot more functionality to them. If you want to create a river biome drowned farm, for example, or if you want to create a salmon farm around here, you have a much wider area in which to do that. They feel like they occupy, if not a similar amount of space as other biomes, then at least a proportional amount of space in the new landscape. And I think just the uphill hike I'm having to make in this taiga forest here is proof enough that they have made some pretty radical changes to terrain generation. And coming out here onto what looks like maybe a meadow or a plains biome with higher elevation, once again, the fact that the world looks so different now is really exciting to me. We've also got some new locations for generated structures, like the pillager outpost over there in the distance can now spawn in some mountain biomes. Desert temples are still going to be partially buried, but will manage to spawn a little closer to the surface, so you don't end up with a desert temple completely concealed by new desert generation. And throughout this entire process, Mojang has been focused on the heat of the different biomes and making that a smoother transition. So in these latter experimental snapshots, we no longer see the microbiomes that were popping up earlier. We no longer see large chunks of badlands sticking out of the side of a snowy mountain. It all seems a little bit more consistent now. Another aspect of the changes to rivers is that it makes navigating by boat a lot more possible. You can ride on the river for as long as the river wants to go, and right now I'm going to hop out next to this abandoned nether portal, and yeah, there we go, we got some iron. Perfect. We should be able to turn that into an iron pickaxe. And having made rivers larger, they've also managed to weed out a lot of the problems that rivers had before, like the fact that they would just dwindle off into nothing and that a river would dry out as it went through the hills of a different biome. I think it's so much nicer having rivers that just seem consistent and sometimes lead down to the ocean, but sometimes just connect two areas of land so that you have a nice, easy waterway to transport yourself on between, say, your base and a village. We now have beaches generating larger, we have stone shores being thrown into the mix, and we even have some areas of the world where biomes just end up going down into the sea. There is no beach right at the edge, there is no stone shore, it's just the regular biome terrain all the way up to the water, which is kind of cool. Is that a swamp? Or is this just a tree in a river? That's really interesting. Funny that a tree in a river has generated with vines here, but it seems like, oh, We have a swamp microbiome right there. I think they are still trying to weed out a couple of those, but yeah, that is a very, very small patch of swamp. Throughout the process, we've seen the devs acknowledge that swamps are a little bit tricky. They're somewhere between a humid, warm, and temperate microbiome. They tend to spawn in some of these areas where there are hot biomes nearby, and the fact that they end up blending with the water in the area does mean that they create a couple of interesting pockets of microbiome that still need to be weeded out. But I really think stuff like this is what highlights how cool terrain generation is now for me. This jungle environment, lush and green, forming this really quite extreme looking natural island, where normally in terrain generation in 1.17 and earlier you would only really see this in shattered savanna plateaus. Now, as we cross the ocean, I'll actually be on the lookout for some caves on the ocean floor, because while ocean ravines no longer generate the same way as we saw in the last experimental snapshot, they generate with aquifers now, so you can actually swim down from the ocean floor into a cave system, and that's more likely to be a flooded cave system, but you may end up finding that you can swim down into an area that will let you out into a dry cave. If you swim up from an aquifer pool, from there you might be able to explore further into a dry cave system. And it looks like this one might have a lush cave in it, because in these experimental snapshots we have finally seen the integration of lush and dripstone cave biomes more permanently into the landscape, and I'm very happy about that. I think they look amazing. I'm sure a lot of you agree. I can't wait to experience some of those in a more permanent world where I can make a base in one and go out and explore the caverns from there. But perhaps some of the most significant changes have been changes to the technical side of the game, and things that we didn't exactly expect from a snapshot series that was designed to test new terrain generation. For a start, very early, we had the change that mobs now required complete darkness in which to spawn, and that a single torch was suddenly almost 4 times as powerful, basically. And this change was, of course, designed so that the cavern layer of the world was a little bit easier to light up, and that lighting was a little bit more intuitive to newer players. But what it really means is a lot more control over what light sources we build with. And I think that's spectacular as changes go. I think this is one of the things I'm most excited about, aside from the terrain and the new caves, is being able to light stuff with candles, of 1 or 2 candles just in a cluster, and have that actually spawn-proof an area. The inability to use light sources creatively has been one of Minecraft's bigger problems for a while, and I honestly think this goes a good way to resolving that problem. I think Mojang will want to look at mob spawning in a little bit more detail in future, because they have tried to make a couple of other changes to mob spawning that the community has ultimately rejected. Like removing height from being a factor in mob spawning, which, while it might have made sense on paper, in practice doesn't really enact the changes they were hoping it would, and makes the game feel a little bit less exciting for technical players. We've also seen some changes to dungeon mob spawners, which to my knowledge haven't been rolled back at all, so anytime you encounter a dungeon mob spawner, it's going to need a lot more torches to light it up. Once again, that's something I hope they end up revisiting in a revamp of dungeons in future, because honestly, it doesn't make the dungeon experience all that more exciting or challenging. It just means more of a hassle, and hassle does not necessarily equal challenge, in my opinion, but we'll get there. I think one step at a time. But I think the biggest thing the team has done here is open up this experimental snapshot idea in the first place. It seems like they've been looking for ways to test changes that may not even make it into the game. Things like making sure that mobs can only spawn in complete darkness, changing mechanics that have been fundamental to Minecraft for the last 10 years, and just tweaking them slightly and seeing what players think of them can have a big impact. The fact that they've introduced these experimental snapshots to give players a little bit of insight and feedback into that process of messing with these bigger ideas and completely changing terrain is one of the more exciting things to me. It sets a precedent for them doing stuff like this in future, and rolling out changes to players which don't necessarily make it into the final game, but are just like what-if scenarios for Minecraft. So hats off to Mojang for being brave enough to do that. Like, Minecraft is such a well-established game at this point that the community often gets a little bit weird about when big changes like this are made. and it's only through sharing this kind of stuff with players and giving a little bit of justification for why they think it could impact the game, the developers are going to see a lot more valuable feedback coming through about changes like this. But right now, Mojang is getting ready for the next Minecraft Live, in which they're going to announce the theme of the 1.19 update, and frankly, I think it's going to be best to save some of your enthusiasm for Minecraft 1.18, because pretty soon we're all going to be looking forward to another update that's just around the corner. And part of me is wondering if we're going to see this experimental snapshot idea happening in future as well, or if this was just such a big update that they couldn't contain all of their ideas in just the regular snapshot development cycle. I'm so interested to see where the development of the game goes from here. But while we saw some of this before the development snapshot started, it has made it even more exciting to come down here into the caves and see the overworld live up to how exciting these caves are as well. We were not expecting such a massive terrain overhaul for the Caves and Cliffs update, but we got one anyway. And at the end of the day, it's still going to be Minecraft. It's still going to be exciting to find diamonds like this, and that is probably where we're going to wrap things up with the traditional 3 diamonds that we need to get ourselves a diamond pickaxe in this world. That's going to be it from me, folks. Thank you so much for watching this experimental snapshot video. My name has been Pixlriffs. Don't forget to leave a like on this episode if you enjoyed it, subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll see you guys soon. Take care. Bye for now.